imagine you're living at the time of the Megillah's events, right? And Esther and Mordechai, they want this holiday to be, founded Lidoros for perpetuity. And you have, let's say, a board. You're part of the board to make the name for this holiday.
Oh, the board.
Somebody says, maybe.
I thought you meant the game board, like dice. That's what I thought you were talking.
Esther Day, Mordecai Day, Victory in Persia Day, and then somebody in the back of the room says, how about we call it Purim? And everybody turns around and they ask, they say, well, why do you want to call it Purim? So, because Haman, he used lots, he used the board to try to destroy us. So let's name the holiday that. And then all of a sudden everybody starts clapping their hands, and you'd feel like that's very strange.
Right.
Rabbi David Foreman, he gives a class about this where he asks this question, and he says, to make the question stronger, just imagine to a holiday that perhaps connects us a little bit more. If you imagine people trying to find the name of the day that we want to celebrate Israel's founding, let's say. So what do you have? People say, let's say Yom Ha'atzmaut. People suggest, all kinds of names, and somebody says, how about Tokarev Day?
What?
Tokarev. And everybody turns around. What's Tokarev? So everybody asks, what is that?
Is that like Nakba?
See, those are the Russian-made rifles that the Arabs tried to use and kill us. So let's name the holiday after that.
Right.
And it's just there's a certain absurdity to naming the holiday after the very the tool of the enemy, and that seems to be what took place with regards to Purim. But more than that, more than the fact that it's something that he used, that Haman used, it's something that's very against the entire hashkafa that the Jewish people have.
Yeah, it's like Mikras.
Right. Things are not up to chance. We view God's guiding hand through all of this. Even in this story in which God's name doesn't appear, if anything, it's meant to specifically call out to us that you have to look for God in these situations. But that nothing's up to chance. And to name the holiday chance is very strange. Besides the fact also that when we're dealing with calling it Purim, we're calling it Pur, where we're naming the holiday after the Aramaic, not the Aramaic, the Persian term for the lottery. So I'm not calling it right. If you look in the pasuk, it actually says the Pur hu hagoral. Right?
Yeah, we should call
it Goral at least, but it's just or call it something that's more of a substantial part of Haman's plot. Let's say call it Death to the Jews Day, something like that. But the poor doesn't seem to be that instrumental, that key of a portion of the entire story that it really is worthy. Even if you want to take this perspective that we could name the holiday after something that the bad guy did, why would we pick this of all things?
Well, you probably touch on this, but the Purim, like if it's dice, it was like a lot, then the Hafochu, so it is very apropos in that way.
So I think that's the I think standard approach, right? If you look in the second source, actually on the sheet, right, so you had on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, that was the day in which the king's command was about to be enforced to kill all the Jewish people, to rule over them, and everything got flipped over. That the Jews are the ones that actually gained up the upper hand over their enemies, as opposed to the other way around. So we typically understand that to be it's almost like a poetic justice. I think we celebrate the turnabout that took place, that we name the holiday after even the tool of the enemy, so to speak. I don't know if that's such a satisfying answer.
No, it is. No, that's definitely. It's like.
You think so?
Yeah.
So for one thing, it's strange because let's say that's the message you're trying to get across. I think you call it V'nahapoch Day. Right? Okay. Something like Turnabout Day, well, whatever it is, but to name it after the tool that the Jewish people had to suffer against, it's very strange.
But that's just the inyan. That dafka, everything that they try to do as we turn it around, and it becomes. That's
the accepted idea of why Purim is called Purim. We name it after the tool that the enemy used, and then that it went totally against him. His plan was, what was Haman's plan? His plan was to bring the Jewish people to a state in which they were all going to be murdered. Whereas status quo, whatever state we were in national perception then, things actually, Haman's plan, the exact opposite happened. We ended up becoming a nation that was much healthier in terms of our spirituality, our political stature, whatever it was. So that's the V'nahapochu. That's the turnabout.
With the eighth that he had for Mordecai and
sorry? The tree that he wanted to use to hang Mordecai with, so it ended up being what he was hung with. So that's the typical approach. That's why Purim is called Purim. Name it after the bad guy's tool for destroying us, so that we ended up, the entire episode ended up helping us out more than it harmed us. But I'd like to ask a big question on that, and with that suggest a different approach as to why Purim is called Purim. If you look in the first source, this is where the Psukim themselves actually say why the holiday is called what it is, and that's probably the biggest giveaway as to why the holiday is called Purim. For sure, if we want to figure that out, we'll look in these Psukim. So it reads, Ki Haman ben Hamadasa ha'agag yitzar kol ha'Yehudim. This is the end of the Megillah. It's giving you a recap. Haman, the son of Hamadasa, he also a descendant of Agag. So he was the enemy of the Jew. Chashav al ha'Yehudim la'adam. He thought to destroy all the Jews. V'hipil pur hu hagorah mamu la'adam. He made a pur, that is to say, a lottery, by which he would destroy the entire Jewish people.
But why would it be a lottery?
Sorry?
Why would it be a lottery?
As opposed
more than an actual vote.
So I think people explain Haman's intention there was to, have a certain, a certain patternless approach to things. To say that everything is totally hefker. That the Jews, they think that there's a system to the way the world works, that God runs the show, and that there's a specific set of rules of how everything plays out. And Haman says, I'm leaving everything up to chance. That's how confident I am that there's no rhyme or reason to the world, etc. That he totally denies the Jewish mission. That might be the sadistic nature of why he wanted to make it happen in this way. But the Psukim continue. No, uvavoa lifnei, the pronouns in this pasuk, by the way, are shifting constantly. So bear with me. Uvavoa lifnei hamelech. When Esther came to the king, Amar im hasefer. So the king Achashverosh, he said that it should be promulgated through books, through letters. Yashuv machashavto hara'a, that Haman's evil design should be brought back. Asher chashav ala Yehudim, that plan which Haman had towards the Jewish people, al rosho, it should be put back on his head. V'solu osov espanav al ha'etz, that Haman and his children were hung on the tree. Al Cain, and therefore karu layamim ha'ila Purim al shem ha'pur. That's why we call Purim because of the pur. Now, if you're arranging these psukim, you're trying to give me the idea that Purim is called Purim because of the lots. So there's a pasuk here that seems kind of out of place.
Yeah, the whole thing about the eighth.
About the eighth, that middle pasuk, I think we could do without. Right?
Right. There's too much of a distance between the two.
If you want to say that the reason why the holiday is called Purim is because of the pur, because of the lots, you would simply skip that middle pasuk. You'd say, right? Haman made a pur, that is to say, a lottery, in order to destroy the Jews. That's why the holiday is called Purim. But no, you have this middle sentence here, where we talk about Esther's plan to destroy Haman's scheme, and then Achashverosh he buys into it, and then Haman and his children end up being the ones that are hung. So it seems that there might be more to Purim than just the idea of the lots. That there's more to explore here. Now, with that, I'd like to take an approach that is adopted by Rabbi David Foreman. He has a fantastic book. If you have a chance to read it, it's one of those books you can't put down.
Did you mention him already today?
I did. Yeah, Simatu Ben Chamarav. Also, we talked about a lot of things.
No. Someone mentioned it this morning at the Tanakh conference, because I just remember that name.
It's a great book. Highly recommend it. If you bought it today, it'd be. I think it's very possibly you would read it without putting it down and finish it before the Megillah. It's very conceivable.
What's it called?
The Queen You Thought You Knew. It's called.
I like Purim, obviously. So
he advances an entire approach by which he thinks Purim is not just called Purim because of the poor. It's because of something else that's very significant. Now there's a turning point in this story that's crucial, and everybody knows what it is. It's in Parak Daled. It's in source 3 if you take a look. So you have Mordechai first hearing about the Gezerah. He cries out to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He dons sackcloth. He goes in some ways to protest perhaps what the king is planning on doing. He goes to the royal courtyard. He goes as far as he can go. And Esther, she hears about the fact that Mordechai is in mourning, that he's making a big spectacle of himself, and she tells him, "What are you doing?" Or she sends through a messenger to tell him that, and Mordechai sends back the decree, a copy of the decree to Esther. She sees what's actually going on. Whether or not she was totally oblivious to it at this point is not so important for us to determine. But eventually, so Esther says, "What do you want me to do? I can't go before the king. I can't intercede. My hands are tied. If I go, the king is going to kill me. The rules are you don't go and approach the king without permission. And if you do, he can say, 'Off with your head.'" So Esther says, "There's not really much I can do here." And now Mordechai has these I think are the only words in the entire Megillah that are actually, we have the exact wording of what Mordechai says. So you have Vayomer Mordechai lahashiv el Esther. Mordechai then replied to Esther, he said the following: Al tadami v'nafshech lehimalei ben beis hamelech mikol haYehudim. Don't imagine that you're going to be able to escape in the king's palace any more than the rest of the Jews. Ki macharesh takarishi, because if you are very silent, ba'is hazos at this time, so an opportunity for salvation, for being saved, that's going to come from another place. You and your father's house are going to be totally destroyed. And who knows, maybe this very this time was this situation was the very reason why you became queen in the first place. That this is so that you could have the opportunity to intercede on our behalf and save the Jewish people, right? So Mordecai is giving in many ways I think almost an insulting speech to Esther, but I think in some ways it's to kind of push her a bit in a way that she makes a decision that she needs to.
Would you say this is the only quote of Mordecai?
I think in the Megillah there's very few statements where you actually have Mordecai speaking.
Oh, it's always in the third person?
Describing what he does. I think this might be one of the only ones.
Where's this copied from? Because Mordecai is with Mordecai,
Oh, so I took this from Bar Ilan. They didn't do the Nikud properly.
No, they did, but most things aren't proper.
Oh, okay.
Like Art Scroll is just with a shva, Mordecai, like how we normally say it.
Very good. So credit to Bar Ilan.
Soloveitchik read the Megillah twice, and the second time did it like this.
Oh,
wow.
Like what we do in Parshat Zachor.
Very nice. Okay. So Bar Ilan, I guess, they're on top of things here. So. Anyways, in many ways, this is a I guess so to speak, a "who needs you" kind of speech. Obviously Mordecai very much needs Esther, and it's very strange that he's posing the argument this way, unless he's trying to play some kind of reverse psychology, trying to pump her up a little bit. Anybody see Miracle? I'm an American, so for me that's like a chashuv movie. Miracle about the U.S. hockey team. No?
I've heard that.
Yeah. And,
Russell.
Yeah. So the coach. This is in one of the big games in the Olympics. Right, one of his players is injured in the game. He asked the team doctor in between periods, what's his story? And the doctor says he has a contusion, he has a bruise, And Coach Brooks, he asked the doctor, is playing more going to make things any worse? Not really. It's just really painful to play through. So after he gets that advice from the doctor, he says, "Okay, great." He goes into the locker room. He starts ripping into him. "You're not a hockey player. What do you think you're doing? Trying to, just sitting out. Get dressed, go home." And he says, "No, I'm a hockey player." And it causes a whole, riling up. It gets them pumped up. It gets them into the game. And in some ways, you almost think that maybe this is what Mordecai is doing to Esther. Who needs you? We could do fine without you, anyways. When in fact, that's definitely not the case. They need Esther very badly here. But something that's very interesting is that besides actually saying that Esther is being a chicken, so to speak, not wanting to risk her life or perhaps her career as queen by going forward to the king, he's actually kind of doing a little bit of character assassination. He's making a very serious accusation here. He's saying not just that you're afraid to go, Esther, but I think the reason why you're not doing this is because you feel safe and secure in your palace. You feel like this isn't your problem, and that's why you're not doing anything about it. So it's a very striking statement that apparently resonates with Esther, but at the same time, it doesn't. It seems like a very chutzpahdik thing to say. Whatever sway Mordecai has over Esther, it's not the kind of thing that you would just, accuse a person of not having any loyalty to the Jews, like Mordecai is doing right here. So what exactly is going on?
Not just that, she's the queen. There's a certain hierarchy level.
Right.
At that point.
Even if they're mashpacha, right, at a certain, just like the brothers, they treated Yosef certainly with a certain degree of respect, even though, they were brothers. To what extent they were brothers that loved each other is one thing, but here, right, Mordecai seems to be taking certain liberties in the way he's speaking to the queen. But in any event, Esther responds appropriately. She transforms herself into the the active heroine that saves the Jewish people. Until this point in the Megillah, you could very easily make a case that Esther is somebody that's very passive. She basically she's attractive to the king. She doesn't she takes orders from Mordecai. Doesn't reveal her identity. She's very passive in all this. Until Mordecai actually makes his speech, Esther doesn't really take any action. She's taken to the king. She doesn't. She's not voluntarily going. So there's a turning point here, and this passage in particular has a lot of allusions to another portion of the Torah. If you look at the next source, you're going to be cheating. But we're going to talk about a few parallels that they have. This speech shares a number of characteristics with another, perhaps more obscure section in Sefer Bamidbar. The connections I could list off to you. We have both deal with a nara, a young girl. Yeah, both deal with a girl who is married. Both of them describe the rules that guide, how this marital relationship should work. Both the Megillah and this portion, it describes the woman in some way connected to her father's house, Beis Avicha, right? Mordecai here says, "You and your father's house will be destroyed." And then both describe a very crucial short period of time that something needs to get done. And then lastly, both of them describe the consequences of silence. This last idea of silence, it's particularly telling. You have doubled statements in Tanakh very often. And what that usually does is, let's say if I tell you, in the Torah we talk about mos yumas, die, he shall die. What's that trying to connote? Die, he shall surely die. Right? It makes it more intensive. He better die. If he does something like that. When we double a verb, we usually we're trying to add emphasis. There's a verb, ches resh shin is its root. It means to be quiet, right? That's doubled in this particular parsha that we're talking about in the Chumash and here in the Megillah. Right, you have Mordechai saying to Esther, he says, "Hakarish takarishi, if you shall surely be silent." But he says at this time, there's going to be salvation from another place for the Jewish people. But that itself, I think, is a very strong clue. If these other connections were perhaps, something that you could, say, it's not really something that's such a strong connection. That this is a clear giveaway in all of Tanakh. This portion in the Torah that we're about to read and Megillas Esther, those are the only places where hakarish takarisher, this doubling of the verb of ches resh shin, appears. So the parsha that we're talking about, as we'll see, it's talking about haparas nedarim, right? The annulment of vows. The basic idea is you have, if you're dealing with a girl of a certain minority age, her vows, her ability to say, I don't want to do action X or action Y, if she wants to make a neder for something along those lines, her husband or her father, whoever's reshus, I don't really know if the politically correct way to say this right now, but whoever's domain she's in, if she's living in her father's house, or if her husband is, the person running the household, so that whoever that individual is has the ability to annul her vows or to affirm them. Let's say. One's wife says that she doesn't want to, eat certain foods that are healthy for her, right? So the husband, if he cares about her, it would certainly be a good move for him to say, no neder for you. I'm getting rid of that one because I think you should be able to take good care of yourself, and this act of negating yourself is not healthy. It's not good. It's not what we should do. But that's the basic premise of what we're going to talk about. Well, let's just look in the Psukim. You're going to see a lot of connections, perhaps. So. The Beis Isha, and there's a mapikeh here. So what we have is, we're going to talk about this later. If a woman is the Isha is her husband, whereas without a mapikeh it'd be a woman, right? So in Beis Isha nedara o asra yisar al nafsha b'shvua. If there's a woman that is in her husband's house and she makes a neder, or she makes something asr, forbidden to herself, through a shvua. V'shama Isha, and her husband hears her. V'hecherish la, and he is silent. Lo hini osa, he is of no avail to her. V'kamu kol nedareh, the neder she made perhaps for something harmful to her, it stands. V'chol isar asher asar al nafsha, anything that she made asr to herself remains asr. Yakum, that is established. V'im hafer yafer osam, and if it is, however, nullified by the husband, osam isha, if her husband does so, but yom shamo. Right, so if the husband says within a day of hearing about this neder, of his wife's oath, so he can say no neder, and then Hashem will forgive her for anything that she might do. Any neder or a shvua, any type of vow or oath that a woman makes to afflict herself, so her husband has the ability to establish it or to nullify it. Here's that doubling of the verb. If the husband is silent, la, for her, Isha, her husband, so he has, in effect, by being silent, he has affirmed and allowed all of her nedarim to take effect. He has established it because he was silent on that day. Again, if he nullifies them, after he hears it, so then he removes any guilt that she would have. He takes away any averos that she would have for violating this oath, because there's no oath anymore. And these are the laws that God commanded us, Moshe, ben Isha, Ishto, ben Avla, Vito, ben Ra, ben Savia. This is talking about a bigger section, which we haven't quoted everything for, but different sections of somebody making an oath in her father's house, or in her husband's house, or perhaps when she's at this sort of in-between stage that we're not going to get into. But this is the section which it seems like the Megillah is, has a lot of stylistic allusions to in Mordecai's speech to Esther, right? And there's a certain message, perhaps, that I think is very, easily trying to be communicated to Esther here. You have, typically we think, two options in a lot of decisions that we have. Let's say if you're Esther right now, it's to speak up, perhaps, right? To say something, to stand up for the Jewish people, or it's to, perhaps, be settled, right? But we typically view our decisions as either yes or no, and we'd like to very often say maybe, or we'd like to be quiet, we'd like to take our silence and not have to actually align ourselves with any one viewpoint or the other. For certain things in life, it doesn't work that way. Right? If you imagine, let's say somebody who is, he goes to an oncologist, he's diagnosed with cancer, let's say, a very advanced stage of cancer that is going to take his life, unless this doctor says there's this experimental treatment that perhaps we can give you. It's going to be very dangerous to your health, but it's perhaps your only chance of surviving, right? So he's weighing the options in his head about whether or not to take this treatment, and at the same time, he seeks a second opinion. He wants to find out if another doctor agrees with this diagnosis, and he goes and the second doctor says, I see where that doctor was coming from, that he thinks that this is, this is cancerous, that he's looking at, but I really don't think it is. I think you're fine. And if you don't get any treatment, and if you do, this is, right, like we said, this treatment could very easily kill you. It's best to just, stay calm, and I think you're fine. I think you're healthy. So a person in that position, can he just say, I'm not going to decide this one, I'm going to sit it out? We don't really have that option sometimes. Right? That's not the way it would work in this situation, in other situations as well. You have William James. He was a philosopher many years ago, so he wrote a book called The Will to Believe. He was talking about agnosticism, of choosing not atheism, not to believe in a God, but undecided. I don't think there's enough proof in the world to really convince me that there's a God or not. And he argues that that's a decision that a person can't, just be on the fence about. That's not the kind of thing that you can do. If you want to live your life as, somebody that doesn't believe in God, that's one thing. If you want to believe your life as a believer, great. But to say, I don't know, and I'm just going to try to live my life without ever deciding on this issue, he says it's absurd. You can't live that way. Because this is something that's really going to determine the entire direction of your life. To be in neutral is to essentially, make your life meaningless, to not be going in any direction whatsoever. And, this is one of those times where a person needs to make a decision. There are a lot of times in life where a person has to make a decision one way or the other. Maybe is not an answer. Being silent is not an answer. It works that way for cancer, it works that way for belief in God. It works that way for Nadarim. That's what we're learning about here in Beit Midrash. The husband has an option. He hears about his wife's neder, and he has a choice. He can either affirm it, or he can say, I'm getting rid of that neder. I don't think that's appropriate for her. I don't think that's going to be good for her well-being. I want her to take better care of herself. So he says, I'm not going to allow that neder to take place. Right? Is there a third option here? The Torah tells us about a third option that you might think is one. What's the third option?
To just be quiet.
Right, to be quiet. So the Torah tells us in this situation by Nadarim, it's like the other examples that we gave. Silence is not an option. If a person decides to make himself silent for that day, essentially the neder stands. If he has a period of at most 24 hours, he has until the end of the halacha, the way we paskin, he has until the end of that calendaric day to make a decision after he hears it, whether he wants to affirm his wife's neder or if he doesn't. If he chooses to be silent, if he chooses to say, I'm not going to actually, express an opinion about this, he has essentially established her neder and it's binding on her. Nadarim work that way. And Mordecai, when he's invoking the language of Nadarim, what exactly is he trying to communicate to Esther? Say, you can't stand by quiet here. This is not one of those situations where you have that option. Isha Yikemenu, Isha Yifeirenu, if you take a look at the psukim again, right, like we mentioned, there's a mapik hey at the end of the word Isha that keeps appearing. And what does that mean? It means her husband, right? And it makes it possessive. And very often when we darshan, when we expound on psukim, we take the words with the same letters as we have them, and we move around the vowels, right? Or we take some out and we say that the reason why it was spelled in this way as opposed to another way, in a more mullet way, is so that you can adjust the vowels in a way that it could also be read in a different way. So what's perhaps going on here is that what Mordechai is alluding to is, take a look at these psukim, Isha yifeirenu v'isha yikimenu, right? A woman can establish it, a woman can annul it. Mordechai is alluding to the fact that, while that's not the legal import of these verses, Mordechai is alluding to the fact that although normally a husband is the one that is in the position to annul and destroy the decree of his wife, that's normally the husband's position, there's going to be a situation in history, and this is it, where a woman has the ability to annul the decree of her husband. And he's telling Esther, this is a time where you can't be silent. You can't be silent. You can't allow this to just take place. And if you do, it's going to be harmful for you, for your family, for your father's house, because essentially what you're doing is establishing it, like in the Dharm. If you're silent, you're essentially buying into it. You are affirming it, right? You're essentially affirming that neder. Here too, shtika ka'odah, right? The principle that if a person is quiet, if they just stand by while atrocities are being committed, they're responsible for those atrocities. That's what Mordechai is trying to communicate to Esther. And if you take a look at this speech, and Esther responds appropriately, right? She understands the message that Mordechai is trying to bring to her by evoking Sefer Bamidbar. Esther then responds appropriately. What does she do? She is meifir. She annuls Achashverosh's nadar, or his decrees, so to speak. She steps in, she takes action, she makes it work for the Jewish people. She makes it that v'nahafachu, like we talked about, that the decrees actually are managed to be flipped over in the Jewish people's favor. If you take a look in the fifth source, what is the shoresh pur? What does that typically mean? We understand lots, right? But if you look, the Radak, Rav David Kimchi, he has a Sefer HaShorashim where he analyzes all the different roots, and he gives you a root. Pei Vav Reish is what he's doing here. He gives you a long list of examples of where this appears in Scripture, and he thinks nullify, hafer, right? In these parshas that we just learned, Isha yifeirenu, he thinks that the root of that word is Pei Vav Reish, right? That to annul, the root of that word is pur. Now go back to source 1. Right? Now if you look back, you say, Ki Haman ben Hamadasa Agag Yitzor Kol HaYehudim. Right? Haman, the son of Hamadasa, who was the son of Agag, so he was an enemy of the Jews. Chashav al Yehudim la'adam. He thought to destroy the entire Jewish people. V'hipi pur. He established a lottery, a pur, hu hagoral, that is the lottery, luhumamu la'adam, to completely destroy the Jewish people. Now when Esther came, and she came before the king, Amar im hasefer, so the king came and he promulgated decrees through writings. They turned about Haman's plans for the Jews, al rosho, right back on his head, and he and his children were hanged. Because of all that, right? Now we're not talking about just the first pasuk anymore, and now this middle pasuk that we said earlier just seems to interrupt the discussion. Makes a lot more sense, right? Why are we calling it Purim? For a dual reason. That idea that we mentioned earlier, I think the typical way of looking at things, Purim, we name the holiday after the goral, the lottery that Haman had. So that's true in one sense, right? That very tool that Haman tried to use to kill the Jewish people is what was turned about on him, and then the Jews ended up rising to a much higher position of prominence than they were before Haman got involved. But at the same time, and perhaps more crucially, we call it Purim because we're talking about the nullification that Esther had towards Achashverosh and Haman's decrees. That's a key idea. Now, there's a lot much more you could develop about this theme. We're not going to get into it. If you look in Perek Tes of the Megillah, the root kayam, kuf yud mem, right, which also appears very often in this section of Bamidbar that we quoted, with establishing. Kimu v'kiblu we talk about, establishing and affirming that language comes up a lot also, again invoking these ideas, that Esther understood the message that Mordechai was trying to communicate to her, and that she had to take action, that she couldn't just be silent, she couldn't be a cherish, right? The root ches shin, it's important to point out. We have other words also for silencing, the shtok, for example. The mama. Right? So generally, typical Mahalik is approach that we have towards these kind of, so to speak, synonyms of the Torah is that they're not synonyms at all. Really, that they're all trying to convey a different idea.
What would you say about Kayam?
So we're not going to go into it, but in Perek Tes in the Megillah, you'll notice the root Kuf Yud Mem of establishing. It's being used all over that Perek. It's being thrown around in a way that it's meant to allude to something.
Could you say that Kuf Mem is also part of that? That she rose to the occasion?
For sure, I think so. Absolutely. Yeah, Kayam to affirm and to rise to the occasion. Those words are probably in many ways related.
Wait, how was she nullified?
How did she nullify Achashverosh's decrees?
Yeah.
she came forward. She said, "We have to save the people," and she, we had to make the counter gezeros. Right. In many ways, that also alludes to the fact that Esther didn't just have to annul, right? But what was the rule that she couldn't just cancel a decree in the classical sense? Achashverosh says, once a decree is made, that's it. But Esther had, in many ways, in order to save the Jewish people, not just annul, but also make new decrees. Kayam. That's where that word comes up more. It's not a theme I was planning on developing, but yeah, that idea can certainly be taken further. That this was a unique situation where Esther, right? Isha yikemenu Isha yefeirenu in Bamidbar. A woman can, we typically understand that to, her husband can affirm it, or he can annul it. Right, but if you read it in the Esther mindset, so to speak, and the way Mordechai is trying to get Esther to read these verses, it can be a woman has to establish it and annul it. She has to work both ends of the spectrum here to make sure that Achashverosh and Haman's decrees, meet the end that we hope for.
So now we can say, when they say where is Purim alluded to in the Torah, aside from Esther, you could say
absolutely.
That's
say for Bamidbar.
Specifically for Esther.
For sure, absolutely. Now, so back to another question, like we mentioned. Why does Mordechai have this biting criticism of Esther? Why does he say that she's chicken? He doesn't say that she's just chicken. He says that she's caring only about her own safety. And I think that's the message when we talk about what's the lesson. This is very nice that Purim is named after not just the lottery, but the annulling of the decrees as well. But because that's a crucial message, I think, of this entire story. Right? That Mordechai understands something that perhaps we don't often enough in our lives. That when you're dealing with many different issues that we have in life, a person very often steps aside. He chooses to be silent, to be charesh, to be silent, right? To make himself deaf, literally. If you look in the Gemara, the term cheresh, that person is a person that makes that person is a deaf mute. Right? So to lahacharish is to ignore, essentially, to close your ears and to not pay attention to the messages, to the various episodes that happen in our lives. Mordecai is telling Esther a deeper truth here. He's saying, I'm not really accusing Esther of, not having any loyalty to the Jewish people and just being concerned about her own safety. But if she chooses to not take any action, if she chooses to make herself silent, it's essentially that, right? Like we mentioned, if a person is silent, that person is essentially affirming the decree. They're essentially going along with everything that Haman wants to accomplish, what he wants to do to the Jewish people. That silence reflects a certain sense of apathy.
So the hafer is the opposite of hakaresh.
Correct. Right. Hafer is to say, I can't stand to be silent here. I have to do something about this. I don't want to be apathetic. And Mordecai is telling Esther essentially, you don't care enough. I know that you're not, directly an enemy to the Jews. But at the same time, if you're just going to stand by while this happens to us, in the safety of the palace, you're an accomplice, essentially. And it's a very important idea in Jewish thought in general. The Ramchal, Rav Moshe Chaim Lutzato, in his Mesilas Yesharim, he says, a person that lacks his rizus, that doesn't have alacrity, the ability to run and do mitzvahs, but they're lazy, they don't accomplish anything. They might not be doing averos, but they're basically a second cousin, so to speak, to an Avarian. They're closely related. A person that chooses to not do anything, as opposed to somebody that actively does evil, we typically morally view these people as on different planes, but Mordecai is alluding to the fact that from a practical standpoint, there's not much of a difference between the two. And Esther, if you choose to stand by, you're essentially on Haman's team. Right?
This is the interesting one. B'Shallah.
Yeah.
Hashem Yilachem Lechem, Vatem Tchavishin, which is the opposite,
Right. Sometimes being silent is a good thing, right? Like,
there it says, God will help.
If you notice, the root cheresh, so that's only applied to people. Right? If you talk about Vayishoku Hamayim in Bereshis, the water is stilled. Right? You don't say Vayacharei because waters don't deafen themselves. They don't ignore things.
Still waters,
right? They just run to they quiet. Whereas with people, like here also by Kriyas Yamsuf, the word charesh it only alludes to a human being's ability to ignore. It's that certain idea of, I heard what you said, but I'm not processing and I don't care about it. We have this lesson, besides the fact that Purim is named after the annulling of the oath, right? There's a lesson there as well, that in all of our day-to-day lives we have a let's say, relationships that turn sour with others, that we kind of give them a silent treatment. We never progress. We never make sure to actually speak up and to do something about it. Or with regards to the plans that we have in life, we never get up and go and do something about it. We prefer to be complacent. That the message of Purim, in many ways, is to get up and do something. Standing by, being idle, is not something that is a Jewish concept, and we view it as being almost as bad as a person that is actively doing evil. Right? Rav Hutner very often comments that, and quotes the Zohar, that also makes this illusion, right? Yom Kippur is a Yom Kippurim, right? That's an idea that's hard for us to grasp, because we typically think of Yom Kippur as being a more holier day, certainly contrasting greatly with Purim, a day of fasting as opposed to a day of indulging in physical pleasures like no other day that we have. But in many ways, Rav Hutner alludes to, I think, a similar idea that we're touching on here, that both of those days, what they share is the idea that a person is declaring who they are. They are being mekayim themselves. They're establishing who they are. And on Yom Kippur, the way we do it is we say, all those actions, all those various things I did, that's not me, right? That's not what I'm all about. That's not who I am. I am something else. Purim, however, is a similar statement. This is who I am, but not by abandoning perhaps various averos that we've done in the past of the year. But in another way, it's almost the Asay Tov version. This is who I am. I'm going to use Purim to declare to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is what I'm all about. And you look at the day of Purim, it's really infused with a special koach in all aspects of, let's say, the three pillars of the world. Right, we have with regards to Torah, Kimu v'Kiblu. This is the day that we re-accepted the Torah. Right, again, that word Kayam coming up. Yeah, with regards to our tefillos, right? Kol ha'poshet yad, with regards to tzedakah, anybody that extends their hand, you offer to them. We say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have to act the same way with regards to our tefillos. And with that itself, with our tefillos being empowered, it's particularly a good time to reprioritize what we'd like to do with all the gifts that Hashem gives us and the things that we ask for from Him. And with regards to Gemilas Chasadim, it's very obvious. How am I saying to God what I am with regards to Gemilas Chasadim on this day? We make it a day of doing mitzvahs left and right, where you're so busy all day, and eventually having a Suda where you elevate everything that you do, to make it a day in which, like Yom Kippur, we're saying who we are, not in the sense of what we're not, but in the sense of what we are. We're being Mekayim. We are establishing who we are. We should make this a holiday of not just Kimu v'Kiblu, but also of making sure that we, so to speak, annul the decrees, the bad decrees in our life, the things that we typically approach with silence, that we ignore, that we shouldn't be ignoring, that we should be able to proactively try to solve those problems, not just let them fester, and also to make it a day, of course, of Yom Kippurim, a day in which we declare who we are, where we are Mekayim, where we establish that we're very special people, that we do very important things, and that we're worthy of Rahmanas from HaKadosh Baruch Hu.